Hello, and welcome to the 14th episode of Karl Marx's 18th Brumaire of Louis Napoleon Reading Group series. Today is Thursday, the 15th of October 2020, and I'm your host, Tom O'Brien. We continue our discussion of the George Floyd protests that had just erupted across the US at the time of the recording. The Brumaire may even get a mention. If you like the show, perhaps you could become a patron. Patrons get an extra 2 episodes and 2 live streams, access to the Emancipation Network Discord, all for as little as $5 a month. And for the month of October, as a special bonus, seeing how Halloween is actually an Irish festival which started on the hill of Tlachta, which is 4 miles from my house. All new patrons will get that most exclusive of items, the From Alpha to Omega Commie Badge. So pile in, folks. Okay, grift over. Let's rejoin the discussion.
Let's talk a little bit about what I think you could see, but what I would worry about. One is, I think, Tom, you're completely right, but what the military would probably do, what it has done in other countries that have faced similar crises, is it has gone into arbitration and has arrested the leadership of both sides. It will sometimes put a white ring hunt in, but often it doesn't. And it will try to establish social peace because it knows that the cost of an outright civil war is too high. Now, unfortunately, the weird thing in the United States, and our history is kind of unique here, we don't have a history of right-wing coups doing that. We only have a civil war because the economic conditions were so out of whack, and you had 2 competing factions within the economic sphere. You basically had a form of slaveholding capitalism that was regressing into something else, and a form of free labor capitalism. And there was no way for those 2 things to coexist in the same society. But if you look at like this as a political crisis, what you would normally see is the attempt of the state to impose some kind of social norm, to co-opt some of those militias, and to bring peace, because most people are going to want it. But I will say this, I actually do think that as much as there are tons of grifters in left-wing, socialist organizations, and like the NRA gun training is a joke, and I actually do think militia training is good. And like, it is unfortunate that most people have no experience with even policing level of arms. Like, I should not be a person who is one of your more experienced people with weaponry around you. I have no military experience.
Yeah, in principle, Derrick, I agree. But how do we express that in a way that doesn't go in the reactionary direction that left-wing groups and militia groups do, like independently, when you don't put them together?
I don't know. I mean, here's the thing. If you were solely dominated by your fears of what's going to happen.
We're talking about hopes here, right?
So
what do we hope for precisely?
Well, what you would hope for was a totally recallable, maybe even officers decided by training and sortition, not even by merit. Frankly,
no, I mean sortition is a fine principle.
Well, the thing is, you either believe that everyone can learn some of this stuff or you don't. And if you don't, then you don't really think that society can be run without a class structure.
Right. Like pretending you think every cook can govern, and then just being like, psych.
Yeah, every cook can govern, but let's create a managerial class out of the most competent cooks so that we can have a classless society.
America's Top Chef, new electoral procedure.
Don't you start, Kyle, with this chef bullshit.
No. That was very insightful. Going from every cook can govern to America's Top Chef is like the basic, Leninist trajectory. Like when you actually try to implement this stuff. So I'm just asking a preemptive question. How do we stop America's Top Chef tendency from taking over?
Well, I mean, we have to ask ourselves, like,
spit in the soup. I think
it depends on the problem, doesn't it? Like,
but let's actually. I want to actually get us to look at the classical answers to this, because the classical answers to this are Burnham and Villafredo Pareto, who say that no matter what you do, you cannot have a classless society because you have an emergent elite because of the distribution of skills and because of a lack of interest in most people because of the amount of effort that has to be put into governing any society, which is why direct democratic societies, one, are never actually, like most people are excluded from democracy somehow, usually because they're slaves. And two, even when that's not the case, those societies historically have been super unstable and only lasted about, very few of them last more than 2 generations.
But they were small, Derrick, and they were surrounded by loads of empires, so they got their asses kicked. It's not.
And I mean, doesn't mean that we, won't work in the future.
That's such a non-answer.
No, but you said
no,
they only lasted a short period in the past. But I mean.
Yes.
There's no first principles to arrive at that conclusion. So
actually, game theoretically, there are first principles to arrive from that conclusion.
But then you have to take.
You can use a selectorate theory.
But I disagree with those first principles.
Well, then good for you. I'm not saying I'm not saying I believe them. I'm saying that you have to have a better answer than it'll happen in the future because you have no society, none. There is not a single society that operates in the way that communism describes its goals to operate on. And even it requires the temporary suspension of all other classes from society to do it. Now, the difference between communism and as understood by Marx, as I clearly understand it, and later deviations is if you think the Goethe critique is imminent versus, schematic, you're still left with the fact that the transition is literally the assumption of radical democracy to demolish the state itself. Communizers pick up on this when they talk about emergent forms of socialization, like redistributing goods is socialization. It's what it is. But, their models for that are either crisis-based or primitive. So what would it look like if we had, say, a militia force that had some kind of recall, some kind of sortition? If we had actual accountability of leadership and also a way, frankly, representative leadership, this is a principle that I'm beginning to come to. I think representative leadership causes an elite to exist that becomes a new class inevitably. And I don't think there's a way around that. So you've given people special privileges by electing them to represent you. We have never come up with a foolproof method of recall that doesn't, that is either consistent or involves in the Civil War. Now, maybe under non-bourgeois conditions, some of these things change, but we have to spell out what that would mean. So
we have to get out of bourgeois conditions.
Right.
So that's nice for later. But for now, seriously, what do we do?
So, but don't you think direct democracy on your phone would work? What do you think about that?
I don't. Because you still have to implement the direct democracy, which requires either total democratization of skills, which does not exist under current conditions.
Oh, I don't think that's going.
I do think voting could be a lot easier.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think it's possible to democratize skills because, you have some physics professor. She spends her entire life learning about nonlinear optics, and it takes her
She wasted her life. She wasted her life.
She spent her entire life learning. You can't learn everything.
Yeah,
I hope she did other stuff with her life too.
I think the thing about Parry Khan's work complexes and stuff like that, I think is pretty good kind of solution to this stuff. I just want to say one thing. We've come quite a way on the podcast. We used to say oh, well, where is the party going to come from? Where the party from? And now a couple of years later, we're talking about how we design our militias. but we fuck off. We don't have a party.
So I do think we could use cybernetic principles and making a more accountable militia structure. I think accountability there as the sort of is going to be more important than prefiguring communism. But the thing is that I do worry about is all that transition stuff. How do we dismantle this? How do you dismantle people who you've given power when you're okay, now give it back without a struggle? And maybe you don't. I mean, but that does lead to like, well, we have to have a cultural revolution every few years to get rid of all, that exhausts society because it leads to like, I don't know, long-term periodic bloodbaths. So like, I mean, to be fair,
I'm only in favor of short-term ones.
Yeah, well, I mean, to be honest about high period Stalinism for a second, that was the theory of the purge.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah. That's correct. Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a form of system in cybernetics that describes what you're talking about there, Derrick, which is one that oscillates periodically between one pole and the other, and it's not a stable system. It's not a viable system. We can't have that kind of system and expect it to last.
No, I'm normally all screaming about how we should shoot the engineer. Sorry, Pouya. But
I'm not an engineer.
Don't shoot the engineer. It's just I'm not an engineer.
No, that's fine.
Damn, you really have become a Stalinist.
No, it's like no. I work in McDonald's. No, you're mixing me up with another fella.
It just reminds me of that. It reminds me of that mathematician. That mathematician in the Cultural Revolution who saved his life by finding Marx's mathematical manuscripts and being like, no, like my work is totally Marxist. What are you talking about?
That's awesome.
I'd be interested to read those.
Anybody want to hear the worst math joke of all time?
Yes.
Okay. What do you get if you cross an elephant and a cheetah?
What?
Elephant, cheetah, cosine theta. And okay, another one. Last one for you. What do you get? What do you get if you cross a bank manager and a mountaineer?
What?
Undefined, because a mountaineer is a scalar.
What is a bank manager?
Anybody get that one? No.
No.
Yeah, I got it.
But what is a bank manager?
Yeah, sorry about that. Sorry.
Like
just killed the entire stream. Sorry, I just killed the entire stream.
Like you take the cross product?
Yeah, dot products. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Pouya, don't analyze them too much. Don't analyze them too much.
Okay.
Let's go. Right. What have we not talked about?
We haven't talked about the 18th Brumaire.
We're talking riots today.
All right, I'm down.
So do we see Trump as Louis Napoleon? Is he going to kill, like, I don't know. How many people did Louis Napoleon kill in the riots? Like a shit ton, right?
Oh, God.
Louis Napoleon, in which riots? Because there wasn't big riots with him, was there? When are you talking about, Derrick? What year?
Let me see.
I thought that the killing was done before he was elected. The June days, he was elected in December 1848, and there was no major grape shot under his command.
Yeah, I think you're right. So
maybe at the start of 1870, was he around in the Paris Commune? Was he still nearly there?
No, he had been captured and imprisoned at that point. He wasn't in charge of the suppression of the Commune. The June days, over 10,000 killed or injured, 4,000 deported to Algeria.
That's Changarnier.
Yeah, that's not Louis Napoleon. But, that is the scale of violence that was existing at that time.
So, who's our, like, if Trump is our Changarnier and not our Louis Napoleon?
No, Changarnier was the general. So yeah. It would have been like Adolphe Thiers or somebody like that was Trump. Who is Trump's general is the question.
Well, it would. Well, it's the thing is, Trump has kind of messed with the army in that he keeps on putting political functionaries over military people, and that's another thing that complicates this greatly because I like Mad Dog Mateus would probably coup him. I don't know.
Wait, this is like slightly unrelated, but you were talking about the job complexes. Don't you think it would be a little inefficient? Because you would have to educate. Yeah, because you would need like a lot of education for like a lot of people.
Right.
Well, not everybody. The thing is, not everybody is like you do 70% maybe of one of your skills and 30% of a lower one. You're still getting trained to do your 70%, and also like it's not like capitalism is efficient in training people.
No, that's true.
Yeah.
In fact, like that is why public education is such a mess. It's because capitalism is really inefficient and really dependent on free riding on its education system, but then creates all these complexes for administrative capture that are a nightmare. Because, hey, Ezri, while we're also thinking about this, how do we do a bureaucratic drift in the transition period? Because that's real.
Well, you just don't want it to be around for very long.
You have to know when you're getting into it. I think you need to know your plan. You need to have a plan for what it is. You say we have a 10-year plan. We're going to get all our fucking input-output tables built. We're going to rearrange. We're going to get point-to-point systems working all over the place. We've got 10 years to do it, and we got to do it. And then it's turned on, and that's the fucking end of it, lads. I think you do need stuff like that. You can't just be going into it like the goddamn Russians did. Like we did that one, Kyle. Remember, like some of the shit they were talking about when we did that crossover one about that paper.
Yeah.
They had no plan. They had nothing. They had no idea what planning was about.
Yeah, nothing at all. Yeah,
literally nothing.
I mean, we learned quite a lot from that, though.
Yeah, we learned how to collapse a society into an even more barbaric form of capitalism than previously existed. But
I mean, like about planning. Like, we learned, like, what were the problems with.
Bit of an expensive lesson, Pouya. Bit of an expensive lesson.
Well, I mean, like.
By that logic, Pouya, they could have given up in around 1936 when all the maths was sorted. And then just went back to capitalism.
Honestly, I mean, one of the greatest tragedies of the Soviet Union, aside from everything, is that like it gave capitalism cybernetics, which is this one real benefit in planning that came out of it.
I mean, but it tried to like annihilate it.
Right.
Like cybernetics had to escape from the dialecticians.
Oh, God. I mean, like emergent systems theory. Yeah, that's true. And you know what's funny is like capitalists realize that they can make some trade-offs with each other in the state and actually drop some competition to get the benefits from it. Although I don't think they do it now.
Right. So like the actual dialectical science like was expressed in bourgeois terms because the Marxists chased it away.
So well, yeah, I mean, I think if you did the like Sweezy monopoly capital solution to these problems, you'd be kind of reconciling those two things, right? You'd have capitalism, but with that cybernetic tone that you were talking about there.
That's what the Western Marxists have always tried to do some variant of to varying degrees of success.
Has anybody seen this? I read this one by Yara Handala. We need to assimilate the professional dangers of power by Christian Rakovsky.
No, I need
to heard it.
Thank you, Yara.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
We will take that on.
Yeah, I was actually just originally, we got off on this thing about the militias, but I was actually thinking one of the things we have to think about, though, is dealing with interclass tensions in an effective way, because that's part of why militias tend to go right wing. The other thing I think we have to insist on is we really do got to get back to this, like, hey, if you're a state socialist who sees the state as a class neutral organ, you're a traitor. Like you are a traitor.
Always with the tact and grace, Derrick.
Like the DSA types,
or just the social democrats, you know,
yeah.
Like the ones that actually have parties in countries where they have some chance at ruling. Yeah, it is
like Canada.
Yeah.
You could participate in elections and still, like, I mean, honestly, tactically, and still realize that, like, the state is utterly your enemy. But if you start believing that's your method of reform, like, that seems to be where the problems come in. Like, I don't think you're a traitor just for, like, well, I mean, like, everyone cites Lenin, but Lenin, like, tactically took, the Bolsheviks tactically took part in elections. It's the whole,
I don't think it's a problem.
Yeah, I don't think that's a problem. So, like, I'm not even saying, like, oh, all DSA members need to be shot or something insane like that.
But the Bolsheviks, they ran
that out of context.
They ran leftists in elections.
Yeah,
but we're not running leftists in elections.
No, we don't. We live in a place where, like, the other thing we have to think about the Bolsheviks, they weren't in a fucking bourgeois society. We are.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I think,
Yeah.
I mean, probably
the conversations between the German Marxists and the Russian Marxists about revolutions right around the time of the Russian Revolution are totally fucking fascinating. Like,
well, I think Russia was probably very uneven. Probably Moscow and St.
It's true.
Petersburg were very developed, or
But-
quite
but-
developed at least.
But you couldn't call that a bourgeois society.
No,
it
it
was.
wasn't.
It wasn't a
90%.
bourgeois society. It had a bourgeoisie. It had capitalist production that was being encouraged by the state, but it wasn't a bourgeois society.
Like no more than Ireland was a bourgeois society when they had the revolution. It was to peasants. Like both my parents came from peasant farmers. You know, everybody was a peasant farmer or a worker on a farm. That's just the reality of it. It was like 80-90% like that.
But I think Russia, it has quite a lot of air. It's quite a big country.
Yeah, it's all empty. It's just trees.
Yeah, so probably in a certain section of it, it was, more or less bourgeois society.
A friend of mine used to fly from Japan to Dublin, and he would go sometimes the Siberia route. You could go two ways. You could go via, I think, LA, and then you could go via over Siberia. And he said for 9 hours he was looking out the plane at night, and there was no lights.
I would love to go to West Russia one day.
That's how big. East Russia.
Oh yeah, East. Sorry, I get them confused.
Well, I mean,
West and East.
we have to be careful though. Like, I'm gonna go and slap down the Banerjee criterion. Like in a hybrid society, you look at the predominant form, and the predominant form of organization in Russia was a collective peasantry that had the development of 14th century England. That's pretty much not, and that was true. Like the conditions on the ground in Russia were again closer to that of first revolutionary France. There was a bourgeoisie, there was some industrial production, but there was not a lot of it. The proletariat was all but all the major communist societies came out of coalitions between massive peasant bases, which Bukharin and Trotsky used to argue about how you handled that, because you needed the petty proprietors involved because they were more of the society than the proletariat. I mean, that's what those debates are about.
But I mean, it's fair to say that's not the situation we're facing now.
Yeah.
So when I bring this stuff up now, I'm saying we can't use that as a model at all, only partially as a model, because the other thing I keep on hearing about is we need revolutionary defeatism, and I'm like, against what? Against whom? Where? Sure, it's a stance to take.
Coronavirus, climate change.
Yeah, we need revolutionary defeatism against
terrorism.
Don't forget ISIS. ISIS, they're coming back.
But I think those debates, they're they kind of homogenize it. But you want to be materialist, or you look at what's the physical development, and it's quite uneven.
It's so uneven that you cannot say that even in Moscow, the predominant form of social life was capitalist, even though it was clearly developing rapidly, even in Moscow.
Yeah, Vita was doing all kinds of state-led capitalist development, but it wasn't a capitalist society. It just wasn't.
It's all kicking off now again.
Well, I think it depends on where you are, is what I'm saying. You had peasant sections, and you also had
Let's get away from talking about. Let's get away from talking about Russia. Come on, I mean, Jesus Christ! There's something happening in America. I'm just looking at Twitter now.
We should do a mode of production reading at some point, because this is a good question for a time when there's not riots.
In Austin,
you go to Kenya. There's in the cities. It's capitalist, and in the outside, or it's non-capitalist.
Yeah, but that's not where the revolution. If the revolution starts there, it's not going to end up working. Is the point, Pouya? Because they get crushed.
I mean, it really depends. If there's anyway, we could talk about this all day. Let's just move on. We'll talk about the production and world revolution.
So
another time.
So here's the thing: we think these riots have a class character. I think that's something. I don't think though class character equals like they are done for explicitly socialist reasons.
Not wanting police murder is like a kind of humanist reason, and in an expanded socialist political program, there's a de facto sympathy for that. Like, we shouldn't tolerate these like reactionary formations in bourgeois society that continuously reconstruct and perpetuate historical injustices and racial differentials and fucking murdering, and also just police murder in general, like just people getting murdered in the streets by cops.
Yeah, I mean, even in the worst stages of the God, I'm going to sound like a tanky right now, but I don't mean it that way. But even in the worst stages of like social violence in Russia, like they still at least gave you a show trial. So and it wasn't in the street. that is different. That's something else. So yeah, I mean I agree with you guys on that, but I also think I'm all about this. Like, I'm not one of these people like, it's not the revolution, so But I mean, as I pointed out, like bread riots were crucial. Like I was arguing with Douglas Lane, and I was like, no, it's not the revolution, but bread riots were crucial to the Mensheviks and Bolsheviks being able to do anything.
Absolutely.
Like
bread riots and rent riots are huge instigating factors in any kind of radicalization.
Anti-police riots are part of that too. The thing is with the police riots is if you lose the focus on the state as a class organ, if we lose that narrative, it is easy for someone to use the state to basically say, hey, our monopoly violence arm, because that's really what the state is. We're going to calm it down for a little while. You guys can just chill. We're going to reinstate some kind of social peace. We can all get integrated together.
Didn't we get that after Ferguson?
Mm-hmm.
Is that going to work again? Wouldn't it have to be so much more extreme than the bureaucratic clusterfuck of American politics would allow?
Martial law. Historically, that's what historically speaking, in other societies, and America is somewhat exceptional in this. And as much as I talk about how there is no American exceptionalism bullshit, it is somewhat exceptional at this, as is Canada, as is the UK. But this is when martial law kicks in. That's what normally happens. I've lived through it.
Yeah.
Is this where things have just finally broken to the point where to restore social peace, we have to take the gloves off?
Not us take the gloves off, but them.
Yeah, but the thing is, and if socialists start getting all, oh, FDR, so awesome, we just need a New Deal, and all that apologia, that you saw, all that fucking, FDR apologia shit, that's not going to fly, and we're going to be part of, we're going to be seen as part of the elite class that is the enemy. Mm-hmm. By the very people we would want to be on our side.
Yeah, then they'd be right.
They'd be right.
Yeah, absolutely, they'd be right.
News just in: Attorney General William Barr announces it's a federal crime to cross state lines or use interstate facilities to incite or participate in violent rioting. Are they going to shut down all the different states? Block off the different states?
They wouldn't even do it for fucking coronavirus.
Yeah, seriously. No, yeah, that's, that would have been more proportionate to the response that you're getting elsewhere.
Yeah, I think China did that.
Is there a constitutional right to freedom of mobility in America?
No, but also
because we have that in Canada. It's in the Constitution. That's why I'm asking.
A la detail. No, okay.
Well, we do have a freedom against internal passports. That's explicit. But
okay, yeah, that's what I was kind of talking about. Yeah.
But after 2006, and really going all the way back to the enforcement acts, no, the states can temporarily shut their borders in terms of emergency powers because it's not an explicit constitutional amendment. But hell, after the Patriot Act, even explicit constitutional amendments don't matter because you can be imprisoned indefinitely without charge.
Right.
They've just not done it. We have not seen those as much as both liberals and libertarians have been screaming for 20 years about those provisions. Everyone's relied off the fact they've never actually used them. That there's social norms that have stopped those things from being invoked. Now, I think if Trump uses them for anything other than this, he's done. But he's probably done anyway, frankly. I mean, this is probably beyond the pay grade of a former real estate man. What do you got?
Well, okay, so if that's true, the only way out is a coup, right? Because what are you going to do? Through the legislative electoral organs, how the fuck do you get Trump out other than a coup? By going outside of them.
You really don't. I mean, what would likely happen is what's probably happening right now in ways we don't understand is the quote unquote deep state. But a lot of the state apparatus is probably assuming a lot more functions than it normally does. But the issue is Republicans have used negative state power for so long, and by that I mean they just don't fill positions, that all these things are not automatable, but it's also beyond Trump's pay grade. And it's all coming to a head now.
Yeah, we've been talking about this extensively in the beer reading group, what specific functions of the U.S. state have atrophied and why Trump is such a problem given the context that he's in.
So what do we do with that? I mean, what I'm saying, if you start putting political functionaries in the military, that's a problem. Even for example, during the neoconservative years, they really didn't do that.
Yeah, I think the closest thing you got was Rumsfeld's weird business reorg of the military, right?
Right.
But so what kind of positions exactly are you talking about when you say that Trump's been filling positions with political functionaries?
Well, he's been collapsing, in the military, he's been collapsing various chairs into one another into sub-deputy appointments. He has also not filled, most of the health, human services and a lot of the State Department are actually run by sub-deputies right now. And that's been perpetual. So the only thing he's been filling is the judiciary. And that's because his backers understand that's super important.
But why is he not filling them, do you think? Is it to weaken them, doing a Bonaparte and put in, just leave temporary weirdos in there so they don't have an institutional power?
Correct. And I mean, some of that is the whole deep state paranoia stuff, but some of that is weirdly, this is why I would always argue with the anti-politicos. Weirdly, this outsider business person thinks you run something by business toadyism, which will not work in a system that's complicated. You can do that when you're just hawking, real estate. You can't do that.
Well, let's be honest. Trump was a failure in that world as well.
Right. So, we used to use Trump as, I remember before he became an entertainment figure, that we used him as, the sign of a failed businessman.
They actually did. I remember that. He was, famous for being the world's most famous bankrupt. He genuinely was.
Are we saying then that the military has been so atrophied, it doesn't even have the capacity to do a coup and substitute itself for the normal administration of society?
Well, it's never had to do it. And while, no, I don't think it actually has, but its technical leadership probably, it would actually have to come from slightly lower than top brass.
So an officer's coup kind of thing.
Yes.
Like they had in Japan.
Correct.
How much social support would something like that get? And could it overcome the head? Because I actually think there's some legitimacy to this, emphasis on the shift to hegemony over formal domination and having cultural practices where the rule of law is embedded to an extent. I think that would violate a lot of the actual things that keep capitalism together in America in a way that would be disruptive.
But we've already seen that. One of the things we've been frustrated with liberals about is how they've been complaining about norms. But one of their points that is actually fair is half of all this worked because of norms that were unstated. And we've only had one other crisis where those norms were violated, and they were violated by our semi-Bonapartist figure of FDR, and where they had to go and make those norms legal. But it's in no one's interest now to make those norms legal. And also, we don't live in a time where Congress sees its democratic functioning as even necessary, which is ironic, right? One of the ironies, and this is one of the things.
It's necessary, Derrick, that it doesn't work.
Right. But one of the ironies now of the 60s is the progressive reform movements of the 60s led to the democratization of a lot of elements of the legislative state, which has led to me, strategic and deliberate obfuscation of those positions. And so what I mean by that, you have seen the deliberate abnegation of positive power from Congress over and over and over again, because it needs so much money to maintain its seat if anyone actually notices what it's doing, that you have two things that are going on. You have capture by donors, which want a status quo maintained, and you have keep your damn head down on the medium level, because you need to be famous nationally and you need to be loved locally. But if you do anything that gets you in the interim, you're likely to get headhunted out of your position. And we've had these, we debated about this, and it doesn't work the same way as it does in parliamentary systems, but we have had increasing rules capture in the Senate. So positions that were not as, Mitch McConnell has more power than, say, prior heads of the Senate. And that's why the Senate has taken on such a particularly reactionary mode right now. I mean, one of the interesting things about United States politics, you mentioned it with the judiciary, but it's also actually been with the Senate, is prior to 2012, those institutions were actually checks on temporary political influences in the popular real, which tended conservative, even if they didn't have majority backing, because of the way we divide up the country. That has stopped now. So it's concentrations of power. But interestingly, those concentrations of power are almost purely negative. No one can do anything, and no one wants to risk doing anything.
It reminds me of the degeneration of the Han state in China into that sort of regional aristocratic control. The influences of the members of the elite towards the state were just negative.
What do people think about all the stuff that's going on about how bad a kind of operational management of the two countries that have had most outsourcing of production, like the UK and America, that they're all their politicians and their upper managerial class are kind of become people who are specialized in managing PR for their price share and buybacks and all this stuff. And they lack kind of core competency in actual old-fashioned managerial engineering type skills. Right.
I actually think there's a lot of truth to that, but I would actually say it's not just in the United States and the UK. The shift in, say, the PRC from the red engineers into the red economists and now into the red lawyers. The same shift you see in the United States over the same period of time. So this idea that we live in an attention economy that's largely controlled by IP and PR has, to me, obscured both the necessary skills of, actually running things, but also the relationship to the commodity form. I mean, the amount of people who think that the U.S. is not productive, makes me laugh, because it's still the second largest productive, manufacturer in the world. But all the old capitalist economies have moved away from that and hit it through automation. I mean, or through hyper specialization, or through finishing. There's not the skills base, but there doesn't seem to be the skills based anywhere. I mean, one of the things about this, about the comparison to the Han that gets Kyle, that I think you're apt on, but you see similar patterns in China. I mean, not in China, in Russia, where it is worse. So
right.
Russia has actually just farmed out most of its administration of COVID to its governors, and that's just led to massive capital capture by the governing things and large resistance. And so you have a state with a very strong military, but no real economy at all responding to this. And so, like, I'm beginning to think like this is not just a U.S. centric problem. Like, something's happening with the elites, the managers in capital. And the other thing we got to remember is, like, bourgeois ownership in our form of capitalism is diffuse in a way that, like, it's very hard to know who the capitalists really fucking are. It is like capital under corporate monopoly capital is sort of collectively owned in a way that was not legally possible in Germany, and still isn't legally possible in Germany, and in any of the societies in the early 20th century. Like, we really are, like, I don't want to sound like I'm agreeing with James Burnham, but we really are dealing with, like, not just a crisis of management, but like a real degeneration of management. Like, these people aren't good at being fucking capitalist.
Well, if that's too reactionary to say, then you just can't, like, describe the situation. Like, Marxists have to just, like, deal with the empirical stuff. And listen, like, some of Marxism's hang-ups with reactionary thought is the way that it applies class analysis to leftists and tries to generate resentment against leftists. So, I mean, that's understandable and makes sense, but, like, also class analysis. You have to deal with, like, class in full. And, like, something I was thinking about earlier is, how long does a transitional regime have to last? Or, like, wouldn't it be kind of like the things in Paracon that were brought up? I think Pouya brought it up, was and participatory economics is that, like, there's a lot of resources that goes into training, but, like, what would it mean to overcome, like, a bunch of the sort of skills divisions or whatever that you see in society, especially when specialization is just, like, part of engaging with certain disciplines? You're talking about some kind of big redistributive skill effort, and it's like one of the hardest forms of class to break, even in concept. Like,
right. But I guess, I think what we could take away from this discussion is that, yes, specialization is pervasive, but it's also kind of rotting. The tendency isn't right now towards ever greater degrees of specialization as, like, a drive towards greater productive capacity. Like, that is happening, but it seems like it's kind of like the whole thing is stalled out in a sense.
I kind of think specialization is increasing because
I'm not saying it's not increasing. I'm saying that there's, relative to sort of like its early gains, there's something degenerative about the way it's happening.
Well, entropy is a thing.
What do you mean by that?
He means that entropy is a thing.
Yeah, no, I mean that, like, if capitalism is approaching a world totality, really, the idea that it can literally progress forever and this turn into something else ignores the fact that entropy is a possibility. And that entropy has always been expressed in Marxism as the tendency, the law of the tendency of the rate of profit to fall. The profit will fall, but there are countervailing tendencies to do it because there's ways to expand and to play variable capital against each other. But there is a point where that's not super productive anymore. There is things like, diminishing returns and increasingly bound choices, and, like, choices made in the past have reflections in the future in ways that are more specialized, and the broad hammer of Marxist analysis has generally dealt with. This is why we always talk about Eric Olin Wright. Like, the broad, I actually take opposite conclusions from Olin Wright about what this means, but, like, the idea that increasingly domination plays a role in most people's experience of the economy. And you can even see that in the way that the areas of the economy that appear profitable in the United States are in fucking IP. They're rentier. That rentier property is not only not productive, it's also highly, highly dependent on a coercive state.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Pouya.
I was gonna say,
don't bring it back to entropy. Don't bring it back to
I
entropy.
was about to. I was gonna be like,
I fucking knew it.
Oh, love
I
it.
can I was like, I can explain that like so well right now. If you guys,
Okay, let's move it on. Kyle, you were going to say something before.
Yeah.
As well.
Well, I was just going to say, to sort of like try to sum up our conversation here, it sounds like, given this crisis situation we're in right now, one would expect there to be martial law. One would expect the military to reestablish order based on sort of comparative political analysis and historical analysis of what happens in these situations. However, there is, in all quarters of American society, degeneration of capacities and organization such that we're kind of looking at the void. Like, there is no clear way forward here. No one has a concentration of mission and capacities such that they can obviously seize control of this crisis. And that includes the proletariat, that includes Congress, that includes the judiciary, that includes the capitalists, that includes the petty bourgeoisie. Everybody is in a kind of degenerated state and operating on limited capacities. Is that kind of where we're at?
It seems that way, and the only historical analogy I can think of in the modern times to something like this is Weimar.
Right. Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. Because of the way the Versailles settlement shook out, even the strongest aspects of German society were rendered atrophied and weak. I mean, that's really incredible that you have a long period of more or less peacetime for America, just kind of business as usual, leading to that degree of chaos.
Well, I mean, you have a non-competitive hegemonic closed system, and
right.
The thing is, the examples we can think of this are all pre-modern. Like I say, it's analogous to Weimar, but Weimar is not, like, Germany was not actually the dominant global power. It was just the most developed, not dominant global power. So,
yeah, non-empire.
Right. The other thing is, similar trends seem to be happening in India, Brazil, even China. You don't see, like, they're all following similar trends and all similarly farcical.
Yeah, and the reason why I think, like, New Zealand is standing out so much right now isn't because their performance is so incredible. It's bucking the trend to some degree. A trend that you can see in all the other countries around the world.
I mean, you know what? All the competent countries right now are tiny island nations that are also relatively not that contributing to the larger world economy. Like,
are you saying New Zealand doesn't produce value?
No, it produces goddamn sheep. Let's be honest.
And you leave New Zealand out of this.
Like, none of these are cores of the capitalist circuit.
No,
like,
absolutely.
Vietnam's not.
You look at capital in New Zealand, and it's largely Australian.
Right.
But also New Zealand is essentially still like it's a settler colonial place. And it's still people who, like, it's like kind of like Ireland, to be honest, in a different way. But it's then, like, if people aren't actually a farmer, their parents probably were.
Well, Taiwan is settler colonial too. I mean,
yeah, that's right. You're right, Tom. That's very true. And
so here, now that we've got way down the rabbit hole, let's pull it back up. What do you want to say?
Aren't pessimistic enough. Is that what we're getting at? Like, is that where we're at? Like,
what's not pessimistic enough?
Like their whole, because communization is based on, like, communization emerging from breakdown. I mean, I know there are other readings, but that's the strong implication of, like, Theory Communiste and even Dubé.
Well, that was literally something stated by someone in one of these, like, communization meetings. There's a story that somebody tells or a story that one of the Antifada people tell about a communizer just kind of interrupting a dinner by saying the revolution will be terrible. There'll be mass death and 30 years of primitive surgeries and stuff like this, and just sounded like Werner Herzog or something, like describing like a carnival of death or something. So yeah, the element is definitely there.
Oh fuck! I was going to say something like if we pull back away from it, maybe we're all gone really doomery or something. But it's like,
well, I
had my doomer phase. I have my doomer phase, so I try and get away from it. So it's like,
I don't think so. I think this is the result of dealing with the historical record, of using the tools of analytical social science and finding that, and kind of being empirically sensitive to what's around you, and finding that people don't like open conflict. That only really happens when things get really bad. Like that there could be open conflict and like an open conflict with social legs, that would end up in anything like a communist revolution.
But but wait a second now. I used to say this to Derrick, and Derrick would say, actually, no, the historical evidence is saying that it's not correlated with fucking revolutionary action.
It isn't. It's
So why are we getting so carried away here tonight then?
Well, it's not necessarily like correlated 1-to-1, but when you do see anything like that, it usually does come from that situation. It's not the predominant way that it unfolds, though. That's the problem. What I'm
saying is that all the communist revolutions we've ever seen have never been economic. They've all been in the context of World War. That is just
but also Derrick, like McNair definitely makes the case, and he thinks that World War One was the choice of the capitalists to not have the civil war against the proletariat, as a way of cleaning them out. Like, you can't even take the world wars necessarily that much out of the class war.
Yeah, you can't really like set up like the imperialist, like kind of inter-imperialist conflict that leads to World War One without understanding or misunderstanding, but having some theory of the economics behind it. Like, I guess like you could tell the story as a bunch of like Hegelian great heads in conflict, but you miss out on a great deal.
Well, my only point is like all this stuff might be necessary for a communist revolution or whatever.
It's not sufficient.
But it's
not how history works.
Way not sufficient, and historically speaking, it tends to tip right wing. Our examples of this in the past are Cadillo forms, military government, total disintegration, subsumption by another major power, which is how Britain really avoided it. That's what happens.
Yeah,
yeah. And the forms of
it's looking good for Canada, Kyle. It's looking good for Canada.
And the forms of communist revolution that that do take hold are the especially reactionary kind for the most part. So yeah, it's not like a pretty record. What are the chances for revolution? Like, is it going to look very different, or are we talking about something like a very different kind of phenomenon? Is it related at all?
Revolution is it. I think the chances for revolution in the United States are getting higher and higher. But being our revolution, I don't know.
What, Bernie Sanders? Yeah,
no.
Our revolution, baby. Our revolution.
No. I think, what Derrick means is,
I know, I'm joking.
I mean, a real establishment of another elite class. I mean, like...
that's what will likely happen. But getting it back a bit away from all this crazy revolution talk, there is also the class compromise, which is very much a part of the bourgeois plans. So, what is the class compromise? Who does it come from?
Is the class compromise part of the bourgeois plans? Because I sure as shit haven't been hearing that from the bourgeoisie.
It was like 50 years ago.
No, I mean, like in times of crisis, they pull it out of their hat.
Like, that's what Bonapartism and fascism and all that is like a class data switch where the both sides. But the thing is, who the fuck are they going to use? What class compromise is there? Like,
we cut you a check. Isn't that good enough?
We cut you a $2,000 a month for a check for a while.
The Yang Gang. The Yang Gang is the new Bonaparte.
No, I mean,
Yang should run again after that.
I think MMT as a positive electoral platform is literally a class compromise position.
Yeah.
And there are elements of capitalists that are willing to play it, but most of them don't seem being willing to right now. Like, they're willing to have total Like, this is what I don't understand. Even a libertarian friend of mine was like, oh my God, they're literally willing to let 2 cities burn. Instinct to generate towards what looks to be informal guerrilla civil war to not do anything. That's weird.
That's what I see out of the bourgeoisie right now.
Yeah, but like things change as the class, as their positions change, their offer will change. It's not static. Even if they've been inept up to now, it's not a static thing. So,
yeah, to be fair, we're seeing that from the bourgeois representatives. We're not actually seeing much from the bourgeoisie at all. Like, if Bill Gates and Bezos and stuff start stepping in a real way, like, they probably would step in towards a class compromise.
Of course they will. And if we get chipped for our coronavirus, so we're not standing too close to each other. That'll be good. Anybody? Who's going to get chipped?
I hated to side with the libertarians, but I have been somewhat worried about the progressive use of this for real social control. They're not totally out. They're gored about that.
Oh,
yeah,
they're right. They're right. They're definitely right about that.
Look, like, I could see Gates kind of getting some of his buddies together and trying to sort this shit out. With the failure, the abject failure of the Bloomberg campaign, I don't know. Like, I think he's cautious about doing that because he knows it might not work. Like, it might not be an easy win. It might be something that kind of falls apart. Like, Bezos, I honestly don't think is the guy. He's rich as hell, but I don't think he's the guy.
Trump. Maybe Trump would give his billions away.
What information would they even get that, like, they can't just get through your cell phone?
Or health records?
Yeah. It's
I'm sure you go on Google, they know your location.
No one's really coordinating all that for anything other than advertisement, and that will change. I know there's a lot of Marxists who are engineer brainy who really don't have problems with total social control. But
It's a fact.
No, but I mean, like, why wouldn't they want to, like, chip you and, like, you can have a cell phone?
We're joking because that's a conspiracy theory on the right now.
Yeah. But I mean, like, that's what I think whenever I see it. I'm like, why would they even want to? Like, I have a cell phone. Like,
right.
Yeah,
you get all the information. Yeah, I pretty much give it to you for free. Like,
right. Yeah. What I'm more worried about actually is for the social control is not that. I'm worried about it being utilized for policy in a real way and being justified. I don't care about people collecting it. But my other thing is, like, when we think about the bourgeoisie right now, all the figures we can think about are actually not on the side of the state, but they must be. Like, they're superficially distancing themselves from the state. And in fact, one of the weird things about the right-wing dialogue right now is, like, they hate the people we should hate. Mm-hmm. They actually do hate the bourgeoisie, but they have these wild-ass conspiracy theories, whereas the people who are supposedly adjacent to us liberals fucking love them.
Yeah. So one thing we haven't mentioned yet, I'm amazed we haven't mentioned it, unless I totally spaced out, was that it's quite likely we're going to get, like, a false flag terrorist attack or something like that now in this, if it goes apeshit. What will we see? Like, do you not think it's likely that they'll stage something, like, if it gets towards what all you guys are talking about, guys and girls? We're talking about, like, it being revolutionary or proto-revolutionary. Are we not going to see, like, the state doing false flag
we
shit?
may be seeing independent. The thing is, I don't think the state will have to. I think right now we have so many cucked reactionaries who would do it for them. Like, but for example, that agent provocateur thing, who was likely, like,
cop,
not a cop, but not a cop, an operating under cop orders at COINTELPRO, just doing that shit on their own.
Yeah.
Autonomous cops.
That's terrifying.
Copunization theory.
Just people that have the functional character. No, I mean, I don't know. It's worth thinking about how, like
COINTELPRO for the 2020s. You know what I mean?
Like,
it will be a thing. It is a thing.
Well, I mean, it is a thing, but I don't know. If you ever read the handbook for, like, I forget if it is the old FBI like handbook for sabotaging like, revolutionary groups and peace groups and stuff. It just has this list of stuff that I see all the time that like left milieu sort of like autonomously reproduce because of the sort of, I don't know, music scene, kind of like literature scene kind of dynamics of the left. Like it just produces this like purposeful stupidity.
When I studied COINTELPRO, one of the things I learned was that except for the Panthers, the COINTELPRO didn't have to do anything except things we were already doing. And they just had to boost the signal on.
Right.
All
right.
they did.
It's like the changelings from Deep Space Nine. They just try to bring out the most paranoid instincts in your own, like that are already present in the society. They cultivate and amplify those voices to destabilize it.
Check out Jumpsuit Utopia, by the way.
Oh dear.
Yeah, Tom, I basically agree with what's being said. Like, this stuff is just going to emerge organically from society, and there will be false flags that are done, but like you kind of just would expect that would happen. Like, that's just like, you look at what happened in Syria, right? Like, there were false flag operations, but kind of everybody was doing them. It's an aspect of what happens in this kind of chaos.
Well, this isn't even a hypothetical. So in Arizona, yesterday there was a shooting at like a immigrant refugee like nonprofit. Like that was yesterday. I don't know anything about this other than the timing of it, but I wonder if it wasn't like spun off of oh shit, some kind of like paranoid emergent narrative with an underlying like race war thing.
Yeah, I mean, we also saw someone randomly shooting into a crowd in Detroit. They killed someone. So
yeah,
right.
And unlike, there's so much chaos. It's like when this was happening in the Carolinas, and the right wingers did that. It was totally clear who the enemy was. It was like we didn't shut up about it. Like, everybody knows about Heather Heyer, but I don't think we're going to learn anything about this because of the nature of the chaos going on.
Rounding up thoughts. Anybody have anything to say that we haven't said?
We'll just say the situation is highly conjunctural at this time.
Oh, good. That's a very helpful thing to say.
Yeah.
No, that's Althusserian.
Oh, God damn it.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's right.
Thank you. That's very helpful. That's a very helpful contribution.
That was a joke.
If Shane was here, he'd talk about rhizomes. He'd talk about rhizomes. That's what Shane would do.
You think they would?
I don't know. Okay, so here's the thing. This has been a very like slow and continuous burn leading up to where we are now. So I don't know how many of us are actually shocked by what's going on.
Right.
I'm not.
Yeah. I'm not.
It interacts with our discussions of revolutionary strategy, and that this is why Marxists have become attracted to Bakunin's political positions, is that riots exist in real life sometimes. And most of the things Marxian strategy relies on don't right now. Like, Marxists have found these social tantrums to be the only social activity that really goes on in their lives, period. And so are trying to think about what out of a situation like this could it possibly mean to be a communist. That's why I think you have people that are like thinking of themselves as Marxists in methodologically or like conceptually significant ways that don't end up with Marxian conclusions on the left. Now, the whole Marxist tradition is a lot of Lassallean stuff. So the word is already being abused. But if you object to, like Marxist with Bakuninist politics, essentially, you have to admit, at least it's being bent, leftward in a revolutionary direction instead of like towards the state.
Burn it all down.
Like, I think it's an acceptable like way of looking at things as a Marxist, even if I don't buy like all of it, but like, how can you not be sympathetic? Like, if somebody with no theory that is just driven by a vague sense of justice can look at this and make the right call.
Yeah, it's inspiring, really. It's like watching Slave Revolt or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's inspiring. Derrick, I've been saying this shit's been coming, and you've been saying no. Well, fuck you, Derrick. Fuck you.
What?
Tom has an empirical prediction over me for once, so he's right. I'm going to give him that.
Wait till you see now. MMT will come in. The rate of profit's going to go up. No, I'm only joking. I am joking there. I'm not. That's not my critique. But
no, but I thought that sometimes my Frankfurt School tendencies kick in and just think social dominion is so overwhelming that people are just going to take it because they have.
Yeah, and it's really fundamental for us to understand that the Frankfurt stuff is written post the failures, and it's like, it's like being a poker player, like trying to play properly after you mess up and lose a load of money in a hand. Mm-hmm. You're going to analyze shit wrong, and you're going to lose more money. And I think there is a big. It's inevitable they will have influence at those historical pieces in time, because everybody be thinking, oh, they're right. But we got to, the crises are going to keep coming, and all we can hope for is that this is probably not the one, but like with more and more people becoming socialist or communist aware, that things will emerge. Like, we're a long way now, Derrick, from the first time you were on the show and we're talking about Occupy.
Yeah, we are. I mean, we've been in this for what? I mean, we even see, like, the fact that there's a left-wing grift industry, as much as I hate it, is actually a good sign, because no one would have ever thought to grift left-wing before 2012. You would have just lost money.
There was nobody. How many, like, Marxist podcasts, like, mine was only getting into it. Doug was into it a little bit. Was that it?
There was Pacifica Radio podcasts that were Marxist adjacent, Seeing Red Radio, which didn't survive, and the ISO used to post its conferences as a podcast whenever they would do them. And like, it was Doug and me, and that was it.
Yeah.
And now there's probably 1,000.
Well,
more.
I guess one positive thing I can say about this situation is that we are seeing widespread disorganization and degeneration in all sectors of society. The people who are going to profit or thrive or even just get by in this kind of situation are the ones who are organized. So there's some value to, trying to find ways to be more organized. Like, It's not completely without opportunity for us. It's just, it's dire. It's a bad situation, but there are going to be openings. As much as this is a symptom of a really terrible societal degeneration, like, people have been talking about the gains won through the riots. And it's like, well, those are real. There will be opportunities for more such gains. It's not completely hopeless. It's just going to be, a hell of a ride.
Yeah. The question for enduring hope is, part of what makes
enduring hope, is that like the military's name for their assault?
Yeah, I'm just Lassalleanizing everything. I'm translating it to terms we can all understand. So when I was talking about, Marxist adopting Bakuninist kind of conclusions and stuff like that, what does it mean to kind of object to that, even though it has such empirical resonance? It's that there has to still be like forms of organization that are helpful, or potentially that could be helpful, that like can come out of them. It's probably not even things that we can build ourselves necessarily, but like, what could there be anything that outlives the actual unsustainable, social tantrum, and can continue to apply some kind of not comparable force, but, to hold the torch in any meaningful sense at all. Like,
that isn't just a grift.
Yeah,
right.
We're not.
That isn't just a grift. That isn't pushed out by the grift. How do you prevent that dynamic from forming? How do you stop the rent cartel market from forming? Like,
Derrick's
radical response to that.
Derrick's communism.
You heard it here first. I've got a question for Kyle.
Is that it? That's all it's going to get is barracks communism and move on? Because I think this is a good question. I think it's the only Marxist organizing question. If you're not going to give in completely to Bakunin and just be like, yeah, you know, I mean, I don't know. Even Bakunin believed in like conspiracies and stuff. You could like influence a crowd or something. Do we have anything to say to that? Like maybe if you just have a little, you know, socialist conspiracy cult that tries to, you know, manipulate the riot, you know, like, is that it? Is that all we got?
The problem is we're running out of time. That's where I'm at. We've run out of time. We needed the Bernie movement, but we also squandered so much effort on it. And like, I don't really know how to reconcile that, because I agree with Tom. We needed it, but we also like, we didn't build these other organizations. We didn't.
Is Bernie going to be like Louis Blanc and betray us all?
He kind of already has.
Yeah.
He already betrayed us.
Yeah.
And he's still decent in a number of ways. But yeah, I mean, if we're taking the hard line on the Lassallean strategy that Derrick was talking about earlier, these people are traitors. And yeah, of course Bernie's a traitor. Like Bernie can't even buck the party.
So I have a question for Kyle here. Kyle, you like to make role-playing games and design them. What name would you give this one if it was one of your games?
Well, I've never been much of a marketer, Tom. I'll have to get back to you on that one. That's a tough question to get on the spot.
Escape from Minneapolis, Murder Fest, Weekend with Bernie. I don't know. Well, come on, we gotta have something.
Tom,
I mean, you know, like Escape from Minneapolis, like that Escape series came out of like the fever dreams of the 80s. And we're just not in that position right now. Like it's a different situation.
How about the Me 3? Yeah, after Me Too movement failed.
I'm concerned, Tom. I'm not mad. I'm just concerned. I feel like the boomer is starting to reach your brain.
It's reached us all. I spent all day yesterday editing 2 episodes.
Well, I have Barbie girl stuck in my head, so you have to live with something.
I'm a Barbie girl with a Barbie world.
I mean, yeah, it's infectious.
Imagination is your creation.
Let's go. Good night.
Hey now. Yeah, I remember I cycled across Europe one summer, and when we were cycling through Germany, they had this song. I don't know if anyone remembers this one, called "Blue, I Am Blue, I Am Blue."
Oh, who could forget?
Yeah. That one. And we were in Germany, right? And you know, before we had mobile phones, and we no idea what was going on in the rest of the world, and we're like going, that fucking Blue song. We're saying only in Germany could that be a fucking popular song. And we came back like to Ireland then, like 3 months later, and it was like number 1 for 14 weeks straight.
It prefigured Gangnam Style as you know.
That's harsh on Gangnam Style now. Come on. I am blue, I am blue, I am blue. That's the fucking lyric.
I was going to say, Gangnam Style is actually really funny if you speak.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. That was actually social satire. That time, the farce did or was it not tragedy? Or sorry, it was not farce following tragedy.
Also, Barbie Girl had some social satire to it, and it was the subject of a lawsuit, which is kind of fascinating.
On this episode, you heard the theme tune The Order of the Pharaonic Jesters and Night of the Purple Moon by Sun Ra and his orchestra. The artwork for the show was created by the Korean artist and author of the 2019 Marx Engels Illustration book. You can check out links to his work and Twitter account in the show notes. Thank you for listening, and please join me for the next episode of From Alpha to Omega. This show is a member of the Emancipation Network, a Marxist podcast and research collective. Make sure to check out our network sister podcasts, General Intellect Unit, Jumpsuit Utopia, Mortal Science, and Swampside Chats.